At this point, the Resident Evil series has a lot of entries, and one thing that every video game needs is a satisfying end. A face-to-face showdown between you, the player, and some kind of ultimate foe. Often in Resident Evil, this means an atrocious monster with bizarre appendages and an array of additional facial features. But which of these abominations is the best? We recently polled our Discord server, asking them what they thought were the best final boss battles in Capcom's classic series, and the results are in. This is James for First Aid Spray, and this is the 5 best Resident Evil final boss fights. Number 5. WESKER, Resident Evil 5. Sometimes boss fights are great because of the feelings they evoke as you die and start again. Dark Souls! Perhaps the soundtrack or the mechanics are what draw you in. Other times a fight is great simply because of the memes. And the first fight on our top 5 list will fall into the former category. Resident Evil 5 is the first Resident Evil game to be playable entirely in co-op, and it's that element that makes this battle so great. Needing to work together in order to really take the boss down brings a great dynamic feel to the combat that was previously unattainable in the franchise. What's more, the arena is probably the best in the series. It's definitely the most bombastic and epic you'll see. Finding that Wesker's ideal choice for a final showdown with long-term rival Chris is an actual live volcano is certainly an interesting shock. It clearly ain't 1996 anymore. But when you learn that Chris has a fondness for punching and chucking boulders, it all makes just a bit more sense. Following a pattern familiar to players of the series, Wesker will go down if you poke at his weak point with enough bullets before, in true Resident Evil fashion, the game invites you to pull the trigger of a rocket launcher to finish Albert off for good. Number 4. Sadler, Resident Evil 4. Just as the original Resident Evil stood as the foundation upon which further classic games in the series were built, Resident Evil 4 is where Capcom laid a lot of the groundwork for the modern entries. Even as the series looks towards a third, first-person driven style, the over-the-shoulder view is still as relevant and prominent in the series as ever. Love it or hate it, RE4 made for some damn good boss fights, the best of which in fact may well be the finale against the game's primary antagonist, Osmond Sadler. This fight starts off with straight up nightmare fuel, starting off with a truly disturbing transformation into a giant spider-like creature. It quickly progresses into flailing limbs and stomping legs all over the place. The boss features several weak points, cleverly hidden as giant eyeballs. Bad luck for Sadler because Leon has experienced popping monstrous eyeballs from his time with the RPD, but more on that shortly. Like any good final boss fight, Sadler can take and deal a lot of grief, and the battle does a great job at testing the skills that you hopefully learn throughout the game to make it out alive. At the end of it all, Ada also has a flashback to her time in Raccoon City and throws Leon a rocket launcher which ends Sadler with some explosive force. Number 3. Birkin G4, Resident Evil 2. This entry starts a trend for this video since it appears in 2 games, an original and a remake, and both of them appeared somewhere on the poll results. William Birkin is RE2's big bad, both as a human since he unwittingly releases the T-virus into the sewers, speeding up Raccoon City's inevitable doom, and as the monstrous form he takes over the course of the game, as the G-virus rips apart his body. Players will face him several times in both versions of Resident Evil 2. However, the one that takes the cake here is the fight against what is referred to as Birkin G4. By the time he mutates into his 4th incarnation, Birkin's massive body needs more than just 2 legs to hold him up, and he becomes a quadruped. It's a starkly different beast from not only his previous appearance, but also anything else in both RE2 and RE1. And this was one of the first boss fights in the series where verticality becomes something you need to worry about, since Billy Birkin can use the environment to his advantage in order to leap down to attack the player from above. Because of the way each fight is staged, it was easy to lose track of where he was at in both games despite the different camera angle types. Not having a good line of sight to a boss makes it easy to be taken by surprise. What makes this one even tougher is how difficult it is to keep track of how close to defeat he truly is. Number 2. The T-103 Super-TYRANT, Resident Evil 2. The T-103 Tyrant, aka Mr. X from Resident Evil 2, is a menacing presence in both iterations of the game, which is why it made the upper echelons of this poll twice over, and that's why we're giving its due in both the 1998 and 2019 releases. Whilst the original only appeared in the player's B side of the run, the remake cast Mr. X as a constant presence in the RPD, hounding Leon and Claire through almost every room and hallway. You'll be forced to deal with him multiple times throughout the game, but there is one time in particular that stands out no matter which version of the game you're playing. We're talking of course about the final time we come across the T-103, without his trenchcoat power limiter, now dubbed as the SUPER-TYRANT. What makes both of these fights so bracing is just how much X's appearance has changed. With the loss of his Terminator-esque jacket, the monster has grown claws and developed the Tyrant standard heart condition. The fights themselves are similar in both versions of RE2, with a countdown putting a limit on how long you can spare, and the Tyrant wielding a devastating attack where he drags his claw across the ground and impales the player. Couple that with the shocking amount of speed he displays and we get a recipe for one hell of a boss fight. Number 1. The TO2 Tyrant, Resident Evil. It's hard to have a list of Resident Evil final bosses without thinking immediately about where it all began. It says a lot that, like the T-103, the original Tyrant appeared in our poll twice. What's most shocking is that it tied with itself for the first place on this list because of the 1996 original and the 2002 remake version, so it's safe to say that this guy is one that folks remember. In fact, how could you forget, this fight is the culmination of everything that you as the player have worked for. Everything about it makes the Tyrant battle one of the most tense moments in the game. The TO2, once awakened, gets things going by killing Wesker, or as far as players know, and then it proceeds to begin its unstoppable march straight at you. Shooting it doesn't even cause it to stumble as it strides towards you, and a single slash can do significantly more damage than most other encounters in your mission thus far. Between the action and the tense soundtrack, you might not realize that you've been holding your breath until you breathe that sigh of relief as the Tyrant explodes into dust by the way of the rocket launcher, which, judging by several entries on this list, pretty much set the standard for how most Resident Evil games would end. So, that was our list of the 5 best Resident Evil final boss fights as voted on by our Discord server. If you'd like to join our community, check the description below. Have any other great final boss fights from Resident Evil? Be sure to mention them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with everything that we do. This has been James from First Aid Spray, and Wesker, you're pitiful.